Yes, good deal. So this is a big deal for UCA. This is a big deal for girls. Power STEM. This is a big deal for me because I am sitting here and it's just a privilege to interview Miss Rae Montague. And we talked about you earlier in regards to had they seen the movie Hidden Figures. And so raise your hand if you've seen the movie Hidden Figures. Yes? Some of you have, a lot of you have, and a lot of you have not. But just to kind of frame what Hidden Figures is about, it's a science movie. It's a movie about these women, 3 African American women, but the Hidden Figures is bigger than that. The actual book is several women. Were there, how many? You know, it was several women in the book, but it was about just their stories. They were computers. They were not necessarily engineers, but they were coders.
Yes.
They were computers. Like, did you know before the actual computer? When we think of computer, we think of something you play with on the your desk, but a computer, before we had that type of technology, they were people. So it was a story about these women who were computers, and they did work in NASA, and they helped launch the first space.
For John Glenn.
Yes. And so we have our own story of Hidden Figures. This is not with NASA, but this is with the Navy. And so her name is Rae Montague, and she was raised in Arkansas.
Yes.
So let's just start by giving her a hand of applause for taking the time to be here. And I thought the best way for them to know who you are were to show them the video. You've been on Good Morning America.
Yes.
So
Harry Connick.
What other shows have you been on?
Harry Connick Jr.
Yes.
In October.
Oh, wow.
And Good Morning America last February.
Yes, I saw that with Robin Roberts.
Yes, yes.
So we have a segment with Craig O'Neill. Do we have that with Craig O'Neill? And so I thought, what a great intro for you to see when Craig O'Neill interviewed her. So I want you to understand who you're actually about to listen to. So we're going to start with the video, and I guess now. Are we ready?
It's almost like my story. And I looked through the periscope, and I saw all the dials and mechanisms, and I said to the guy, "What do you have to know to do this?" He said, "Oh, you'd have to be an engineer, but you don't have to worry about that." You're female, and at that time the terminology for us was Negro, but you're black, and you'll have a Southern segregated school education. But you can do or be anything you want, provided you're educated. The admirals came to me and said, "Young lady, we understand you've got a system to design ships." And I said, "Yes." They said, "The president has given us 2 months. We can give you a month. Can you do it?" I brought that rascal in 18 hours and 26 minutes. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? And just think how fortunate I was.
Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? So thank you for being here. We're honored to have you, and just to hear from you, to sit at your feet and listen to your wisdom. You know, this is a conference that we are encouraging young women, so 8th and 9th graders and college students. That you will encourage me, so you will encourage anybody that's here. And we want to talk to them about the STEM and just encourage them to pursue their dreams.
Yes.
Because we know in the area of STEM, women is an underrepresented field. So when I Google you, if I look up who is Ray Jean Jordan Montague, this is what it says. She was an internationally registered professional engineer with the U.S. Navy who is credited with the first computer-generated rough draft of a U.S. naval ship. So when I say that, what do you think when I read that?
Well, it's amazing because when I was a girl and wanted to become an engineer, and by the way, I decided to become an engineer when I was 7 years old. The United States captured a German Minotaur submarine off of the coast of the Carolinas. This was in World War II. And at 7, my grandfather took me down to see the submarine. And they let me go up the little ladder and down the hatch and let me look at all the dials and mechanisms and look through the periscope. And I said, wow, what do you have to know to do this? And the guy said, you'd have to be an engineer, but you don't ever have to worry about that. I didn't realize I'd been insulted. But I went home and I told my mother. And my mother said, you can be anything you want, just as I spoke there, provided you're educated. And there's no such thing as women's work or men's work, but you've got to be educated and you've got to work hard. Run circles around other people. Now, with the college degree, I was not allowed to attend, well, before that, I wanted to go to engineering school, and the only school in the state that offered engineering as a degree was at Fayetteville, and they did not accept black people in the undergraduate school.
What year was this?
This was 1952.
1952.
Okay. So I went down to Pine Bluff to, at that time it was AM&N College, it's now UAPB, and got a degree in business. The day after I graduated, I marched off to Washington, D.C. and went to work for the Department of the Navy. And even with the college degree, the Navy started me at the bottom of the ladder. What they didn't realize was that I had a photographic memory. And I could listen to two conversations, well, hold two conversations and listen to a third, and I could learn while doing so. And I remember how I created every job I ever had after that. And I worked with these engineers, guys who had graduated from Yale and Harvard, and people who had worked on the Manhattan Project developing the atom bomb. And they didn't realize that I was learning while listening to them. Time went on, and I went to another agency. Well, I taught myself to operate the computer by watching a young man, because only engineers could operate the UNIVAC 1 serial number 2, which is now in the Smithsonian Institute. And I said to the guy, his name was John McKendra, John, teach me to operate the computer. He said, oh no, if I teach you to operate the computer, you'd have my job. 2 weeks later, for some reason, none of the engineers showed up for work. And I walked over to the computer, and slowly but surely, I started to replicate the movements I'd seen him making, and the tapes took off, and I started doing the type-ins. My coworkers were peeping around the corner, and because I was from Arkansas, they thought we didn't wear shoes down here. So they were dumbfounded that here I was fooling with this $1 million piece of equipment. They went back and they told my boss. And he came out and he watched me. And finally he said, Ray, I didn't know you knew how to operate the computer. I said, I don't. He said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I know how to do enough to get my job done. He said, fine. You know more than anybody else here. So from now on, this is your job.
Wow.
So I had to teach all the other civilians who were not engineers to operate the computer. Well, time passed, and I transferred to another agency. And at this agency, it normally takes 2 years to do a ship design, the rough draft of a ship design. And President Nixon was in office, and he said, instead of 2 years for a rough draft of this particular ship, he would give the Navy 2 months to do the rough draft.
So it should have taken 2 years, but
Yes.
he gave them 2 months. Gave you guys 2 months.
Yes, he gave the Navy 2 months. And the admirals came to me and they said, young lady, we understand you've developed a program to design ships. And I said, yes, but it hasn't been tested. They said, well, we can give you a month. Can you do it? The president has given us 2 months instead of 2 years.
So it went from 2 years to 2 months to 1 month for you.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I came in, I said, well, it hasn't been tested or proven, but Columbus Day weekend was coming up. I said, I'll do it over the weekend or I can't do it. I brought that rascal in 18 hours and 26 minutes.
Wow. So you wanted to learn how to operate this computer system. They would not teach you, so you watched them operate. One day they didn't come to work and you just learned, you taught yourself.
Right, right.
And they recognized your ability. So then they said, oh, she's pretty good. So when something was needed to be done, they came to you. And you
Correct.
did what they originally said 2 years, you did it in 18
Months. No, 18 hours.
That's what I thought.
18 hours and 26 minutes. Now, for that, I received the Meritorious Civilian Service Award, which is the third highest honor you can receive as a civilian with the Navy.
Wow.
And then the Secretary of the Navy nominated me to be the Federal Woman of the Year because he said I had revolutionized the design process for all naval ships and submarines.
I would say you deserve that. Would you guys agree that she probably deserved that award? Yes. Well, isn't it an honor to have you here? So listening to your stories, and I know what you just took us through in a couple of minutes, just the experiences that you had. Were there any moments where you tried something and you experienced failure and then you had to go back? How did you respond to times where you did something and it did not turn out the way you thought it was going to be?
Okay, that happens quite often. You usually only talk about the positive stuff. But you have to be willing to accept failure. But you pick yourself up and dust yourself off and move on. I had several occasions where I attempted to do something that I thought was manageable, but it wasn't. And I handled it. I found a way of glossing it over. You never lie to people, though.
Right.
This is the important thing. Gain their trust, and they will believe you. If my admiral said, Ray, what about such and such? And if I didn't know the answer, I'd say, well, I don't know right now, but I'll get back to you. They trusted me to get back to them. Well, I'd go get the answer from someplace, and I'd come back and I'd give them a true answer. I'd write a letter and place it on the admiral's desk, and he'd see me the next morning and say, Ray, I signed the letter that you put on my desk. Now, what was it about? And I'd tell him what it was about. So that shows you the trust they had. But you build up that trust, okay? And life is beautiful. After the first ship, I always worked on the first ship of a class. That first ship's name that I did in 18 hours and 26 minutes was the Oliver Hazard Perry. That was the FFG 7 class of ship. It was a destroyer escort. And they said they wanted to make it fast, so I put 2 jet propulsion engines on it. Even, excuse me, because they wanted it to zip around fast and be able to escort the destroyers and protect them. Well, last year, when I was called back to Washington to finally be recognized as the Navy's hidden figure, I actually met a Navy captain who told me that the first ship he sailed on was the Oliver Hazard Perry. He said that was in 1984. Well, when I did the ship design was 1972. So I'd never seen my ship. And can you imagine how I felt to meet somebody who had lived on my ship?
That's amazing.
It's great.
That's amazing.
Now, one of the things that you must learn is that don't get stuck with a project and think because you did something that's different, that you've got to stay there and mother it. That's the mistake you make. You pass that on. You teach somebody else to do it, and you pass that on, and you move on to bigger and better things. This is the way you grow.
Right.
All right?
I talked to a group last week, and it was similar to what you just talked about just don't settling, being in a position where you continue to grow. So these are 8th and 9th graders, and maybe some other grades here. What would you say to these young women getting ready to take high school credit courses to make sure that they don't settle, that they make decisions today that are going to help them be exactly where they want to be tomorrow?
Okay. Remember I told you that I decided to become an engineer when I was 7. When I was in 8th grade, I remember very clearly that we were talking about what we wanted to be when we grew up. And of course I said I wanted to be an engineer. And all other kids laughed at me because they thought I wanted to drive a train. That's all they knew an engineer did. Well, one of the teachers, Mrs. Holliday, heard them teasing me. And she called me aside and she said, "Ray, don't be upset about them laughing. They just haven't been exposed like you have. But aim for the stars. Don't lose your dream. At the very worst, you'll land on the moon." Well, I believed her, and I worked hard. Now, interestingly enough, after I designed several ships, the Department of Defense established a group called Manufacturing Technology Advisory Group. It was built up with people who, the term is CAD/CAM today, but that's computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing. I helped to develop that, okay? So when engineers wanted to take the boards like a doctor or a lawyer, they had to be able to pass the portion that was called manufacturing technology. And they said, well, what about the people who invented this stuff? So I was grandfathered in as a registered professional engineer because I had helped to develop the technology that the engineers had to use. And someone then called me and said, well, Ray, I understand that you now have a professional registration in the United States. Why don't you try Canada? I understand they have a license now in manufacturing technology. And I did. And because I never used a title of Miss or Mrs., everybody thinks that I'm a man with the name Ray Montague. So I applied for the Canadian license. And the license came back and said, based on his qualifications, he is internationally registered professional engineer. So I'm registered in Canada and the United States. But what I was going to tell you is during this time, the Department of Defense established a group called Manufacturing Technology Advisory Group. We were made up with, now you know that I work with men mostly, okay? Guys from Air Force, the Army. I was the Navy's representative. There was a guy from NASA, then industry and academia. Well, this is back in the day. We were going around the whole country looking at the technologies being used and making recommendations to the Department of Defense on changes in technology that should be used or implemented to industry and to the other services. Well, we sent a spacecraft to the moon. And the little robot went out and extended its arm to do a soil sample of the soil on the moon. But the arm would not retract. The guy responsible for that arm retracting, his name was George Sally. And George was locked up with me at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base doing this work for DOD. And so NASA sent for George to come back and find the glitch in the robot's arm. And we said, oh no, we're the experts in that area. Send the data to us. So here we are at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they sent the data to us, and we spread it out. And I can't say which one of us found the glitch. I'm pretty sure it's George Sally, because it was his program. But 72 hours later, that arm retracted.
Wow.
So Mrs. Holliday was still teaching. And when an article came out about it, I cut it out and I sent it to her. And I said, you told me to aim for the stars. I've been to the moon.
Wow.
And she used that as part of her teaching goal.
Wow. That's amazing.
So you see, you never let your dreams go. I never dreamed that I would do anything that would touch on the moon. And even when Mrs. Holliday said that to me when I was 8th grade, it took me a while, but I got there.
I think they want you to use that mic right there.
Okay.
Is that?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I'm so sorry. We'll keep that on, though. We'll keep that.
You mean this mic wasn't working or not?
We're sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
This is clear, but we need this one because they're streaming you, so people all over are watching you. So this will help the people on the internet hear you, but that'll help the people out there hear you.
All right.
We want you to hear it.
Okay. Now, I was lecturing at the Naval Academy to the midshipmen because if they were going to go aboard ships, they needed to know the technology of CAD/CAM and manufacturing technology. I lectured there several times to the engineering department, and I would travel all over the world in a sense because the United States is the leaders in the technology. So I worked with the Australians and the British on their ships because I was the Navy's authority in that area, and they would come to work with me. And you stop and think, a little girl from Little Rock who's doing this type of thing, how far-fetched is this? But it was my dream to be out there and be an engineer, okay? Well, when I'd finally gone as high as I could as an engineer, they advertised for a program manager of ships. A program manager of ships is the same as a CEO of a company. And I applied for it, and were they shocked when I was selected and they saw me. Because not only did they think that Ray Montague was a man, they thought Ray Montague was a white man. And they found that I was the first female program manager of ships in the history of the Navy. Now, as such, I had 5 field activities reporting to me. There was Pearl Harbor, Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, Mare Island Shipyard, Norfolk Naval Shipyard, and Indian Head Proving Ground. I had a staff of 250 people. And now this is where my business degree comes in, from Arkansas, right? Engineers don't usually know about getting their budget into the federal budget or getting their programs into the federal budget. But because I had been a business major, I knew how to do this. And I could make sure that my information went into the federal budget. And so I had a line item in the federal budget. I had a $1 billion line item.
Wow.
I could go on the Hill, that's what we call going up to Capitol Hill, and defend my budget. Once a month, I had to go to the Pentagon and brief Vice Admiral Rich, who was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, on the status of CAD-CAM and ship design. And I did this every month. Well, one month, my admiral called me in, and he said, "Ray, I understand you've been over to the Pentagon and briefing Vice Admiral Rich." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Don't you know you're supposed to go through all these wickets before you go there? Get approval?" And I said, "No, nobody told me." He said, "Well, if you should ever have to go again, would you please let me know?" I said, "I can tell you now when I'm going." He said, "You can tell me now?" I said, "Yeah, I go every month."
Wow.
He said, "How long has this been going on?" And I said, 18 months. He said, "Go on, Ray." Go on.
So can you guys hear me? Do I need to, you want me to use this? I'll ask you a question. So you get the job because they think Ray Montague is a man on paper. You would intentionally, you don't put Miss or Mrs. in front. So you show up. They no longer realize that you are a white male. They see that you are an African-American woman. Tell us how that story goes from there. Once they realize who you are the boss, over 250. You had 4, you had Pearl Harbor, five places reporting to you. Tell us how you navigated, because I'm sure there were some struggles. And although your struggles may be different from the struggles that Miss Montague had, you're going to have struggles. What would you say to these young ladies, how to navigate through those struggles, and how did you navigate through that? Because I'm sure there were struggles. Were there struggles?
Oh, yes. I had plenty of them. I know you won't believe the obstacles I faced.
Wow.
But the attitude was they didn't believe that Ray Montague could do all the things that I was credited with doing. And I ended up having to run circles around people. But I ended up being better at it than they were. And they were stunned. I can remember walking into a group of guys, because I worked with men most of the time, and they thought I was part of the Hill.
Oh.
And the guy looked at me and he said, "I'd like a cup of coffee." And I said, "So would I. Make sure mine has cream and sugar." So you've always got to have some dialogue ready. Because people will say things to you and they expect you to respond in a different way. But when you respond with something that sets them back, you know, they say, "Oh, I didn't figure on that." So they don't have a response. But by the time they figure out what I'm talking about, I've gone on, I'm in charge. Okay? Now, many times people would set me up or try to you find that the higher up you go, the fewer friends you have. Okay? Now listen to me carefully. When people do mean things to you or say negative things, don't take it personally. Don't forget what they said, but don't be evil and try to get back at them in that sense. Don't let it fester and grow in you, because then they are controlling you. But if you don't react the way they expect you to, and smile sweetly, and move on, then you're controlling them, because they can't figure you out. All right? Now, it's important for you to remember that. They would try to set me up, stab me in the back. People would try to befriend me. I'd open doors for people. I remember when, usually when you're working, they'll give something that they want to fail. They'll give it to the busiest person there in order to have you not be able to do it. And then they can get away with saying, we had a woman in this position and she couldn't hack it, so that lets them off the hook for about 10 years. Or we had a black person in this position and it couldn't hack it. Well, I was determined to prove them wrong. So the Navy decided to have a federal women's program coordinator to try to bring women into the higher levels of the workforce. Well, nobody was interested in doing that, so they assigned it to me in addition to my technical work. Well, needless to say, they thought I would fail. I did the Federal Women's Programs coordinators during the day, and I did my technical work at night.
Wow.
I met with people and tried to work with their managers, and what they finally had to realize, I had a meeting with the Admiral every Friday, and if they didn't cooperate, I'd tell the Admiral about it, and he'd call them up while I'm sitting there and tell them, get up here. Ray tells me such and such, and you and I cooperated. What is the problem? Well, I had found people in the mailroom who had college degrees. I was able to bring them out of the mailroom and put them in journeyman-type positions to go from a grade 5 up to a grade 12, giving them the training, the education they needed to advance.
You said that you, in that story, you distinguished the difference between reacting and responding. You said you didn't react, you responded. Could you talk to us about the difference between reacting to the situation and responding to a situation?
Okay, if you react, you can get fiery and upset and stomp your feet and act ugly. But if you don't respond in this manner, you can be sweetness and light and smile and walk away. But I'll get you. All right? Well, you least expect it. All right? And that leaves people wondering, what on earth is she going to do now? My own boss told me one day, he said, Ray, I would hate to really cross you. He said, because you won't do anything to me right now, but I'd be afraid later on to shake my head. I'd be afraid my head would roll off. But one of the things that I found is when I open doors, and you must open doors, don't be like the queen bee. Don't climb up the ladder and pull the ladder up behind you. You must open doors for other people. Bring people in. Show them what they can do. Encourage them. Now, in many cases, people that I had brought in and that went up the ladder, I would hear them say later to other people, she's only interested in herself. She doesn't care anything about us. Well, that hurt. But I had to grin and bear it and go on and try to open doors for other people. People forget, okay? After they reach a certain point, they want to say, if other people turn against you, they'll join the crowd. My life was threatened many times when I accepted the awards. You know, I told you about the Meritorious Civilian Service Award and the nomination, the Federal Woman of the Year. My life was threatened if I accepted those awards. There were 4 other guys who were receiving the Meritorious Civilian Service Award for other areas. They had to hold their ceremonies separately. Mine was held the next day because they didn't want their ceremonies to be interrupted. When they held my ceremony, the auditorium had to be ringed with naval officers to keep the people who were threatening me from coming in and doing something. Security had to move my office from the 7th floor to the 1st floor across the hall from security. I could no longer work at night. They had me to move my car where TV cameras could monitor it. You think that's not putting a lot of pressure on you. But I decided I'm stronger than they are. And I can handle this. Eventually I became the boss of most of them.
You know, that's phenomenal because you decided that you were stronger.
Yes.
We benefit from that decision today.
Yes.
What would you say to the women, the young ladies in here who are interested in going into technology fields? What would you say to encourage them specifically in the field? You know, if they want to be an engineer, there are many jobs in the STEM related field. What advice would you have for them? You speak perseverance, you speak to respond, not react. What else would you say specifically to the career?
One of the things that you need to realize is there are so many options available to you that were not available to us when I was growing up. Find out what spin-offs your major can have for you. Look and see what somebody else is doing. How did they get there? If you notice, I have a PowerPoint presentation that says changing obstacles into challenging situations. When somebody says you can't do something, that's an obstacle. You might have to drop back. That's a challenging situation. Go a different direction. And it might take you longer, but you can achieve and get there. No. I wanted to be an engineer, wasn't allowed to go to school, took the challenge, majored in business, but I worked it together, right?
Yeah.
Now, but you figure out what options you have. There are a lot of people who are in criminal justice as a major, and they think they want to be a cop. But there's so many options available to them, such as working with the State Department, doing all sorts of things that they've never heard of. You look it up, reference it, find out what backgrounds you need for the different things. My son is a graduate of the FBI Academy. And then he went to at Quantico, Virginia, and eventually President Clinton reopened the John F. Kennedy Assassination Review Board. He brought my son back to Washington and made him the senior investigator for the John F. Kennedy assassination. And while David was doing that, he got his master's degree in crime and commerce from George Washington University. And because he made so many connections with people in other countries while working on the Assassination Review Board, he met people who were in Interpol, things of that type of thing. So he then got his PhD in international relations and public policy. Okay, you see what you can do? He's now a professor of criminal justice at EULA, but he's now the director of e-learning for the University of Arkansas at Little Rock and the law school.
Wow.
So you have no limitations as to what you can do.
That's a good segue, because you talked about how initially you wanted to go to the University of Arkansas. Was it 1956? 1952. You wanted to go to the University of Arkansas, but you couldn't because you were an African American. So would you tell them what's going to happen? Is it next month?
Yes.
Next month? And so, I preface that because you talked about how you may have an obstacle, but you don't let that stop you. You may have to go a different route, but always keep your eye on what's in your heart to do. So in 1952, you could not go to the University of Arkansas. So tell them what's going to happen.
Okay. Well, on May the 12th, I will receive an honorary doctorate from the University of Arkansas.
That's amazing.
Now that will be awarded in Pine Bluff. But I received a letter saying they'd already ordered my regalia. And then PBS is coming in from Arlington, Virginia to interview me on the 17th of May. And Fayetteville is sending a video crew in on the 12th of May to interview me and do videotape, because in November, well, there was a guy named Silas B. Hunt. Silas was the first black person to be admitted into the law school at Fayetteville. This was 1948. Silas was treated so badly, they made him take his classes in the basement. But a few white students went down and took classes with him. Silas only lasted for one semester. He developed tuberculosis and he died. After all these years, they have finally awarded Silas B. Hunt his law degree posthumously. Now, there is such a thing now as the Silas B. Hunt Legacy Award, and I am to receive as a pioneer at this Silas B. Hunt Legacy Awards banquet in Fayetteville in November.
Yes, great. That's wonderful. That is an amazing story, and what an example of not letting an obstacle keep you from what's in your heart. So you have a lot of memories. Would you share with us your fondest memory in the U.S. Navy?
Let me tell you something that made me very proud. It was unexpected, but at my retirement, and remember I told you that my mother was always there and pushing me. My mother was the wind beneath my wings. She made me everything I am today, all right? But at my retirement, my mother was sitting there on stage, and they presented the flag, the United States flag, that had flown over the nation's capital in my honor. And they brought out the certificate from the Arkansas of the architect of the Capitol that said this flag was flown over the Capitol in my honor and presented to me. And it had the date of my retirement, from a grateful nation. Can you imagine?
Wow.
A little girl from Little Rock receiving something from a grateful nation?
It's amazing. Wow.
You think, you don't know how good that felt. And for my mother to be there to see it. Oh man, I'm 10 feet tall. But I had some other beautiful memories. I told you, I think, about the guy who walked the ship, or lived on the ship, the first ship that I designed. And the last ship that I worked on was a nuclear submarine, the SSN-21. It's called the Seawolf, and it's still in service today. So I'm still fighting for my country.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So you started working on computers in what year?
1956.
1956. So it's 2018. What do you think about all the changes in technology and computers? A lot has changed.
A lot has changed. But let me tell you, when I was called back to Washington last year, the next day I went to Dahlgren, Virginia, which is sort of, I'm going to say, a spy type operation. And I had predicted 40 to 45 years ago that, you know, how you have to store spare parts for ships or whatever. And that's very costly to manufacture that and just have it sitting on the shelf and you might never need it. So I had predicted that we would have raw bar stock on the ship. And when a person needed a spare part, they could, send it by internet, because I helped with the internet. It was called ARPANET back then.
It was called what?
ARPANET.
Optinet. Okay.
ARPANET, that was the Army's version of the internet. And so I worked with them, and then we had the internet.
Oh.
Okay, before that, I worked with time sharing. Time sharing was the forerunner of all of that. And I'll go into too many stories if I tell you all of that. But
Just the changes. What do you?
the changes, okay, so I told them that they would be able to send the pattern for the spare part and manufacture it on the ship. Well, when I was at Dahlgren last April, they took me over to see spare parts being manufactured. They were using plastic filament and cutting the part with lasers. And they could do that aboard the ship now. And they were sending the pattern to the ship. And you just have this package of plastic filament there. And they would do layer on layer. My son said I was looking like a kid in a candy store. That here's something I predicted 40 to 45 years ago that they're doing now.
Wow. Wow.
It's so lightweight, and they said, we thought you'd enjoy seeing this,
bet.
and I did.
I bet. How are we on time? Are we good? Okay. So you've had a lot,
Yes.
and I'm sure are we going to give the ladies time for questions? Are we going to? Before we will, if I will come out and then I will take the mic and we'll let you ask some questions. We'll let them ask you a few questions, maybe about 3. So if you want to ask a question, if you guys would kind of, let's maybe have the ladies to come up here. So if you want to ask Ms. Montague a question, you can walk up to the side here. And if you head this way now, then we'll put you in position and she'll answer your question. But as we have the ladies coming to ask questions, if you could, in 3 words, so 3 words, what would you say to them to navigate through their lives so that they can respond and not react, that they can carry themselves with integrity, and just be a success story like you are a success story, in their future, that they can look back and have the reflection that you've had?
I can't do it in 3 words.
Okay, you have more than 3 words. You have as many words as you want.
No, the best is yet to come.
The best is yet to come. That's good. She did. So we don't have anyone have questions? No questions? Okay. So, young ladies, if you want to walk this way, want to stand and walk this way, and I'll come to you. Any questions? I don't see any. Okay, come here. Come on. Yay.
Who was your biggest role model? Like, who impacted your life the most?
She said, who is your biggest role model?
Okay.
I guess I didn't have to do that.
Okay. When I was in high school and junior high school,
Just stand right there.
I was in school at that time in Pine Bluff. And dignitaries would come to the college, AM&N, and they would come over to my school, which was Merrill School. And I had a chance to meet Mary McLeod Bethune, and she held up her cane and told us that was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's cane. She was a part of his, what they called a kitchen cabinet. I met Jesse Owens, Joe Louis, Marian Anderson. People of that type would come and inspire us to be all that we could be. And I really appreciate that.
Since you were always busy, did you have time for your personal life to do things that you liked?
Yes. I was married, and I have a son. I spoke about him. And I played chess, I played bridge, I love to dance, I love to travel. I'm not a cook, and I don't keep house. My mother always told me when I was growing up to stay out of her kitchen. My job was to go to school and make good grades. And when I moved to Washington, I took my mother there shortly thereafter, and she did the cooking and kept the house. My job was to make money. Okay? But I did have a lovely personal life, but I couldn't be out finger popping every night because I was studying and trying to learn so I could run circles around the guys. Okay?
You went through a lot of racial and gendered prejudice in your life, and in this day and age, there definitely is still prejudices, but what is the biggest advancement you've seen against that? Like, what is the biggest change you've seen since you were a kid, like in the feminists and the movement to, everyone be equal? Like, what's the biggest change you've seen?
Good question.
Well, darling, the fact that we can vote. And if we don't like the system, we can vote to change it, but you must vote.
You must vote.
Don't hesitate, and you must teach your children to vote.
Right.
Okay? When my son was a little boy, I remember when Jimmy Carter was running for president, And my son was in short pants. So that tells you how old he was. And when I went in the booth to vote, I had him right with me. And I said, when they close the curtains around me, you duck under the curtain. And they can't come in and get you. And then I picked him up and told him which levers to press so he could vote for the president.
Wow.
And then for the inauguration, I actually had a neighbor who worked for the FBI, and she gave me tickets to take my son to the Senate, well, to be at the Capitol, but the swearing in is at the Senate office building. And here we were, and he's this little fellow, and he's there to see Carter being inaugurated. And remember, he had voted for him, all right? And he was the little fellow, and he says, I can't see. And a white guy standing next to me, a tall guy, just picked him up and put him on his shoulders. And he said, now you're the tallest thing here.
Oh, what a story. What a story.
So you said when you applied for, I can't remember the title, but the executive position at the Navy, you purposely didn't include like Mrs. in your application, something that would give away that you were a person of color or a woman. How do you think your journey would have been different if you had included that information?
It's a very good question.
Honey, you think I had a hard time. I wouldn't have gone nearly as far had I used that. But instead of, my middle name is Jean, and if I had said I was Ray Jean Montague, that would have identified me as female in normal conditions. But I use Ray J. Montague. And even though my Ray has an E on the end, people ignore that. They cut it off with R-A-Y. And I know in France, they said, one of the guys, when I was speaking, said, well, before I spoke, they saw my name written. And he said, oh, he has a freaky way of spelling his name, doesn't he? So but my journey would have been much harder.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I would have reached quite the same levels as early as I did. Remember, I'm way ahead of the times that they thought. But I was right on time
Right.
to open doors, okay? And break a lot of glass ceilings.
Who fully encouraged you to be an engineer?
Well, remember when I was 7 years old and I said that my grandfather took me to see a submarine, and I asked what I would need to know to be able to do that. And the guy told me I'd have to become an engineer. And doggone it, I did it. In spite of the system, not because of it.
Right.
But I defied all the odds. And you can do the same thing.
How did having your son affect how you maintained your career?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
How did having your son affect how you maintained your career?
Good question.
Well, I'm an only child. So I grew up around adults. So I was a miniature adult. My son is an only child. So he was a miniature adult. And because I had to travel so much in order to earn the same money that the guys were earning, I took my son with me, and many times my mother, and exposed them to things that they never would have seen otherwise. For example, I wanted my son to realize that we were not the only people who had been oppressed, that other people had been oppressed in their lifetimes, and they had achieved in spite of that. I was on the International Board of Directors for the Numerical Control Society, and we had all these people from industry and everything, but I was a lone woman on the board. And I took my son with me. This time we met in Hartford, Connecticut. And there was a guy there whose name was Henry. Henry had worked with the Jacuzzi brothers, developing the Jacuzzi whirlpool. He was a survivor of Auschwitz. So I asked Henry to tell my son how to survive in Auschwitz when he had lost all of his family there. So he took David aside. David was about 8 years old. And he took him aside and he explained to him survival techniques. But he also told him how to survive a death march. The death march, he told him that if you were in the middle of the death march and you collapsed or fell down, they would kill you. So what you want to do is always get in front of the line and set the pace, regardless of how short your legs are. Other people are struggling trying to keep up with you. So you set the pace, even in school. Write your papers early, do a thorough job, and present early. And you set the bar or set the pace so that other people have to compete.
That's good advice.
That's survival. David does that even today. He's still jokingly teasing when he is advancing in something. I say, you still set the pace, aren't you?
That's good.
So that's what you do. You set the pace.
Good deal, good deal.
So you said that people doubted you all the time. Did anybody from your family or friends doubt you? And when they figured out that you could actually do it, how did they react?
But I'm trying to understand, did my family think I could do this?
Yeah, did your family doubt you? And when they realized you were going to be a success, how did they respond? Is that right?
What?
Okay.
Well, believe it or not, I have a lot of relatives here in Little Rock, and they've done well in their own areas, but they're still living in the 50s. And they never come to see me. They read about me, and they'll call and say, I saw your picture in magazine. And I'll say, which one, baby? And at one time they said, oh, you and David were in there. And I said, that was when I first came back. I said, oh, that was soiree. And since then they, will call just occasionally. But nobody, none of them really respond well to what I've done. They didn't know what I was doing, that's what they say. They knew I worked for the Navy, but they didn't realize what I was doing. And
Because you were in D.C.
I was
you
in
were
D.C.
away.
And now when they would come to D.C. for a meeting or something, I'd entertain them and take them to see my office and things like that, but it never registered with them that I really was in charge.
Wow. Great answer.
If you could relive one of your moments in your life that has ever happened, what would you
The last one.
relive in your life?
Okay.
I've had a good life. I think that I was put here for a purpose. I had to go through all the obstacles in order to achieve and succeed. If I hadn't had to go through all these hurdles, suppose Fayetteville had accepted me. I probably would have been stuck in a little cubbyhole, never meeting the people I've met or touching the lives I've had a chance to touch, to open doors for other people and have other people open doors for me. My life would be different. And I think that it's important that I have lived long enough to achieve and then come back to inspire you all to be all you can be. There's no limit to what you can do if you believe in yourself. Never let your dream go. You must have certain hardships in order to know what it's like. Okay?
Very good.
So you talked about traveling a lot for your job. Did you have like a favorite story or a favorite place you'd love to go?
Well, I love San Diego because I have so many ships out there. And I could stay in a hotel room and look out and see all of the LHAs out there. There was the landing craft helicopter assault ships. It was number one, it was the one that I worked on. But when I'd see the whole fleet out there, that's a wonderful place.
Wow.
And of course, I travel so much, but I love being near the water.
Were you ever scared at any given point in your life?
Of course. Of course, darling. Remember, I told you that my life was threatened several times, and you couldn't let them know it. When they were saying, they went to the admirals and everybody else and tried to stop the presentation. But they came to me. People wanted to know, did they actually confront you? And I said, yes, they did. And I said, I've been eligible for a lot of awards and never received them. But you can bet your bippy I'm taking this.
Okay, our last question. Come on, last question.
I was wondering if at any point in your lifetime you considered following a different career than engineering.
God gave us all many talents. And one of the problems that most people have when they dream of doing one thing and somebody says you can't, then they step back and say, oh, they won't let me do. They won't allow me to do. And they roll up in a big ball and wait to die. But remember I told you about stepping back and going in a different direction and achieving. It might take you longer. And I can't think of anything that I would like to have done other than, now that we've gone to the moon, I think I would like to have been an astronaut. But that wasn't available to me at that time.
Thank you. Did you, young ladies, was she not phenomenal? Let's give her a hand. Let's give her, was she not? Is this not an honor? Thank you. Thank you for walking in your purpose. Thank you for not being hidden anymore, because we see you and we are so glad that we see you. And I hope she inspired you. You guys leave your things. We're going to leave their things on the table and go to the next session. Okay, let's give her a hand one more time. Thank you, Ms. Montague. You were phenomenal. And they're going to go to their next session. That